Welcome to the Scottish Rite Journal podcast and audio excerpt of the Scottish Rite Journal, brought to you by the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction, Mother Supreme Council of the World. This week's episode, The Story of Henry M. Wheeler by Gregory S. Kearse, 33rd Degree, comes from the September-October 2016 edition of the Scottish Rite Journal. Have you ever heard of Jesse James? Well, of course you have. Now, on the other hand, have you ever heard of Dr. Henry Wheeler? Not so likely that you have. So this astounding saga just might prove that the bad guys leave a historic legacy that is remembered far longer than the good guys. Henry Mason Wheeler was born in Newport, New Hampshire in 1853. Now, when he was 2 years old, the family moved to the town of Northfield in Minnesota. That's Minnesota Territory, then still a frontier area. Now, we don't know much about young Henry Wheeler's life. His father was originally a stock drover, but at some point became the owner of a drugstore in Northfield. As a young man, Wheeler acquired a love of hunting and a skill and comfort level with firearms that would remain with him throughout his life and figure prominently in this story. Now, being a good student, Henry took advantage of the fact that a college education was available right there in his hometown and attended Carleton College, then in its first decade of existence. His next academic stop was in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where in 1875 he was enrolled in the University of Michigan's medical school. Now, his life might have remained ordinary until the events of September 7th, 1876, intruded and thrust Henry Wheeler into celebrity status for the rest of his life. Now, on that date, the Jesse James Gang rode into Northfield, Minnesota. The James Gang, based in Missouri, had an astonishing string of successful bank and train robberies dating back to the Civil War. Now, ordinarily, the James Gang was not challenged because of their fierce reputation with gunplay. This was not to be the case in Northfield, Minnesota, though. On that date, young Henry Wheeler was relaxing in front of the dad's drugstore. He was enjoying a vacation from medical school. He noticed three strangers rode up to the bank across the street. They tie up their horses, then sit down on some boxes outside the bank. Now, later, these three would be identified as Charlie Pitts, Bob Younger, and one of the James brothers. Two more strangers, Cole Younger and Clell Miller, arrived on horseback. Now, the first three entered the bank, Clell Miller closing the door and Cole Younger remaining in the street. The owner of the hardware store came along, wanted to make a routine bank transaction. But when he met with resistance at the door, he was struck down by Clell Miller and thrown into the street. At this point, Hank Wheeler shouted, "Robbery! They're robbing the bank!" Clell Miller fired at him, the bullet going over his head. Hank ducked into the drugstore to find a weapon. He found none there. He ran out the back door of the drugstore, down the alley to a hotel, where he found an Army carbine and raced upstairs to a window overlooking the street. And by this time, the downtown Northfield area was a combat zone. The rest of the James Gang arrived. Several local people had secured weapons, and the two sides were blazing away at each other. Now, Hank Wheeler took aim from the upstairs window and, with his second shot, hit and instantly killed the outlaw Clell Miller. He also shot and wounded Bob Younger, although that outlaw escaped. At the conclusion of the action, which lasted probably 7 minutes, 2 outlaws and 2 local people were dead. After the gun battle, the net effect was that although Jesse James escaped and lived, the reputation, success, and very existence of this outlaw band had ended. When Henry Wheeler died 54 years later, he was the last surviving person of those who played a major role in the Northfield bank robbery of 1876. While it's sometimes difficult to separate historical fact from legend, one of the legends about Wheeler is that he approached the sheriff after the gun battle, when it was over, and he had an intriguing question. Now, as a medical student, he needed a cadaver for anatomy class. He needed to either provide one or pay for one. But after the Northfield raid, there were fresh bodies all over the street, so Hank sensed an opportunity. He asked the sheriff if he might have one of the outlaw's bodies for his use at medical school. Well, the sheriff winked and nodded and said, Hank, it'd be against the law for me to be turning the bodies over to you, but I'll tell you what, I'll see that the outlaws are buried plenty shallow. Well, the legend says that a day or two later, Henry Wheeler shipped a box or a barrel by railway express in care of his roommate at the University of Michigan. The container was labeled pickles and smelled heavily of formaldehyde. Now, Henry Wheeler graduated from medical school in 1877, and his next studies would be at the College of Physicians and Surgeons in New York City. There, he completed what would be called today a residency. Now, during this time, Henry married his first wife in 1878, Miss Adeline Murray of Northfield. In 1880, his medical training finally completed, he returned to this hometown of Northfield to set up practice. His wife, Adeline, died in 1881 during a difficult childbirth. The infant daughter also died. So it was that Dr. Henry Wheeler left his hometown of Northfield in 1881, possibly to put his wife's untimely death behind him, and moved to the town of Grand Forks in the Dakota Territory. Now, a year after arriving to Grand Forks, he was appointed surgeon of the Great Northern Railway. Later, he held the same position of railway surgeon for the Northern Pacific Railway. Wheeler was in partnership with various physicians over the years, but from 1896 he was a partner in Wheeler, Campbell, and Williamson. Now, in those days, they were the largest medical practice in the city, which years later evolved into the Valley Medical Clinic. In 1894, he became secretary of the State Medical Examining Board, served several years in that capacity. And he also was a member of the U.S. Pension Board and served as president of the North Dakota State Medical Association. Now, it was said that Dr. Wheeler had a gruff exterior and a rather brusque manner, but in reality, these masked a heart of gold. The story goes that Dr. Wheeler was called by a poor widow to attend her stricken child. The home was clean, but bore the hallmarks of poverty, and malnutrition was evidenced in the faces of mother and children. As the doctor put on his overcoat, the mother apologized for the fact that she did not have any money to pay for his visit, but she did assure him that she would pay him as soon as she could. Well, a smile flickered for a moment around the corners of the doctor's mouth. He held out his hand to say goodbye and assured her that the child would get well and promised to call again the next day. Well, the other hand dug down into his pocket, and when he left there was a $10 bill on the table. In 1883, he married his second wife, Miss Josephine Connell of Grand Forks. They built a new home in the Central Park area in 1885. It still stands today, bearing the plaque of the National Register of Historic Places. Henry Wheeler was an active citizen in the civic life of his community. Always a sportsman, he appears in 1897 as the president of the Grand Forks Gun Club. The city directory of 1898 states that he was president of the Whist Club at the prestigious Pioneer Club on the top floor of the St. John's Block. He acted as district campaign manager for President William McKinley. In the early years of the 20th century, Wheeler is shown as vice president of the Commercial Club, the forerunner of the present Chamber of Commerce. His political career started at about the same time, and in 1909 we find Dr. Wheeler seated on the Grand Forks City Council. In 1917, he was elected to the highest office of the city and became, his honor, Mayor Henry M. Wheeler. He was re-elected once, but when the city changed to the city commission form of government in 1920, he chose to retire from public office and active politics. Now, it's not known what induced Henry Wheeler to become a Freemason. He was made a Master Mason September 25, 1879, in Social Lodge number 48 of Northfield, Minnesota. He was 25 years old and received the 3 Blue Lodge degrees within the space of 8 days. When Brother Wheeler made the move to Grand Forks, he demitted from Social Lodge and on November the 11th, 1881, was elected to membership in Acacia Lodge number 15 of the Grand Lodge of Dakota Territory. Today, it is known as Acacia Lodge number 4. He apparently made an impact as a Mason because only 1 year after his arrival, he's listed as the senior deacon of Acacia Lodge. Now, he served that lodge as worshipful master for 3 terms, starting in 1883. Not only was Brother Wheeler active in Blue Lodge, he was also a member of the York Rite and Shrine. Outside of the Masonic family, he held membership in the Odd Fellows, the Knights of Pythias, and the Elks. In 1884, Worshipful Brother Wheeler represented his lodge at the Dakota Territory Grand Lodge session in Aberdeen. Again, must have made an immediate impression because he was elected Grand Junior Warden at this session when he had been a Master Mason for a little less than 5 years. He was twice elected Deputy Grand Master in 1885 and 1886. Then in 1887, at the ripe old age of 33, he became Most Worshipful Henry M. Wheeler, Grand Master of Masons in Dakota Territory. The Grand Lodge session over which Most Worshipful Brother Wheeler presided was that of 1888 and was held in Deadwood. There were 100 constituent lodges, of which 8 were still under dispensation. The membership of the Grand Lodge stood at 4,051 Master Masons, with a net increase of 512 during the year. In his prepared remarks, Grand Master Wheeler commented on the Grand Lodge treasury, the balance of $5,164.40, stating, "This will amply be sufficient to discharge all the accrued indebtedness and leave a neat balance in the hands of the Grand Treasurer." On April 13, 1930, his trestle board was complete, and after only a couple of days of feeling ill, he died of heart complications. His services were held, and his body lay in state with a Knight Templar honor guard. Many of the Masonic Brotherhood sat together for the service. Also, many non-Masons attended. The entire medical community of Grand Forks sat together as a body, with many physicians from out of town. The flags in Grand Forks flew at half-mast that day. Immediately after the service, his casket was placed on a train, and Henry Wheeler commenced the final journey to his hometown of Northfield, Minnesota. On the next day, he was buried in Oaklawn Cemetery with Masonic honors by Social Lodge number 48, which had given him his first introduction to Masonry over 50 years earlier. There he rests today with his parents, a brother, a sister, his wives, and one of the little ones that died in infancy. Any citations and accompanying photographs for this article can be found in the September-October issue of the Scottish Rite Journal. And don't forget, you can read the Scottish Rite Journal anytime by downloading the Scottish Rite Journal app. Free now in your app store. The Scottish Rite Journal is published by the Supreme Council, Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction. The illustrious S. Brent Morris, 33rd degree, Editor-in-Chief. Copyright 2019, all rights reserved. I'm your host, Bob Chase, 33rd degree. Thanks for listening.